Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ross McKeechee. I'm the host of Branches of Wisdom, the Banyan Books podcast and live streaming event series. Delighted to be joining you today and very, very excited about our guest, Richard Rudd. Before we get into our conversation with Richard, Banyan Books acknowledges that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyan Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyan's podcast and event series are free. We welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the show description below. Also, I can see the comments are already flying in. That's great. And towards the end of our conversation, we're going to take some of your questions, the live audience, for Richard Rudd. So go ahead and keep them coming as we're speaking today, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Okay, if you don't know who Richard Rudd is, where have you been? Richard Rudd is a teacher, mystic, and award-winning poet. And he experienced a life-changing spiritual awakening at age 29, which led to his development of the Gene Keys teachings. His studies with renowned spiritual teachers, travels across the world, and deep inner explorations culminated in this profound body of work. In 2019, Richard was named on the Watkins list of the 100 most spiritually influential living people, solidifying his influence in the field of personal and spiritual growth. And today, Richard Rudd is with Banyan Books in conversation about the Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose, which is being released as a special anniversary edition 15 years after it first came into the world. Does your DNA have a hidden purpose? And could it be the transformation of consciousness itself? The Gene Keys offers a powerful approach to unlocking your untapped potential by awakening the sleeping genius within. Combining Western astrology, the I Ching, and genetic archetypes, these transformative teachings guide you in decoding your Gene Keys profile and help you turn shadow patterns into creative gifts. And guess what? This new luxury edition is complete with a slipcase, a ribbon foiling, and gilded edges. And it's a very special keepsake for any Gene Keys fans to treasure. And this is a lifelong study, this book. If you want to learn more about today's guest, you can go to his website, which is genekeys.com. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome for Richard Rudd.
Thanks, Ross. It's lovely to be here, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Richard. It's really nice that you took the time to join us.
My pleasure.
Okay, so there's this special anniversary edition. The original Gene Keys was published 15 years ago. I know there's a lot more years that went into creating it, and it's become a huge phenomenon. I'm just curious, are you surprised by the success that it's had?
Sometimes I'm surprised, and a deep part of me is not surprised, because I remember when I wrote the book and I and it took about 7 years to finish it and get it kind of where I was happy with it. And then I remember putting the final stop, the final full stop, on it, and I said, "That's it, I'm done." And I had this distinct feeling then that this book had a journey ahead of it, because there's so much love and kind of experience of mine had gone into it, and sort of I knew I'd encoded something profound, and so yeah, I from that point of view, I kind of knew that it was going to have its own dharma, and but it's amazing and a privilege to be here 15 years later, and this lovely edition, and yeah, just seeing how it's grown and how it's helped people and is continuing to help people.
It's wonderful. I know many people that have been profoundly impacted by it. I'm still a newbie when it comes to the gene keys, so we'll get into some of my questions in a little bit about the specifics of the work. I'm curious to know, though, how your kind of relationship to it has evolved since it was originally created.
Yeah, I kind of sometimes talk about it as a transmission rather than, the book is a book, but then there's a transmission that came through it, and that kind of it wraps itself around it, and so the transmission continues, I guess, as you read it, as you imbibe it, as you contemplate it, but then the transmission has continued to grow and formed a whole huge body. So after I'd finished the book, in a way, that was just the beginning for me, because then the transmission began its real work, which was seeding lots of other streams and synthesizing. One of its main works, this particular set of teachings, is to synthesize different teaching from different streams and lineages and weave them together without trying to kind of hodgepodge them, just be using the inspiration of different streams of wisdom and then weaving something new from them, rather than trying to kind of piece something together consciously. So I think that's where it's sort of that's where it continues to grow, and it continues to sort of operate inside me in that way, and continues to surprise me, actually. And I think it's become, for me, more and more about embodiment, and it's very joyous. In fact, it's a very joyous transmission to be around, and the people who gather around it seem to be pretty joyous as well. So I have a really nice job. I'm like a flower salesman or something, that only delivers good news. So it feels good.
Oh, that must be wonderful. You use that word, it's more about embodiment for you now. What does that mean to you? We hear this term a lot. What is embodiment for you in this context?
I think it's about, that we have in this, particularly in, inheriting spiritual teachings from the East. And many of those teachings have been about kind of ascension practices. And they've been about kind of attaining something, some heightened transcendent state of consciousness, and then that arrival at nirvana and leaving the earth plane, and that being seen as a kind of accomplishment, a journey and an attainment that we all ought to be somehow heading for. And a lot of the big Eastern teachings have that kind of truth running through them. But I think nowadays there's also another very powerful set of teachings that are more about coming down and in. So there's the up and out philosophy, but I'm more the down and in. So I'm interested in bringing those higher teachings down into the form and embodying them into myself and into the whole of humanity, in order that we can actually transform this planet as well through our own self-transformation. So it's very much about not trying to escape, and not that is a viable. There's a completely viable path for many people, but the path that I'm on very much is about bringing those higher spiritual currents down. They're more the currents of involution as opposed to evolution, bringing them down and into the body and into the mind and into the emotional system, into our relationships, into our families. I'm a family man. I have kids and mortgages and business and very kind of grounded, ordinary human stuff. And it's about bringing those higher teachings down into that kind of a life, so that it's relatable to people on, who are just ordinary people. I mean, no one's ordinary, but you know what I mean by people who aren't recluses or monks or in monasteries on those kind of paths, which are, again, perfectly viable paths. But most of us live in this other world where we can't do that, or we don't want to do that. And so the Gene Keys are a teaching for everyone in that way.
Yes. Yeah. More of a householder's approach.
Quite.
Right. Okay. Now, in the preface to this new edition, I'm just going to quote you here. You wrote, "The central thread of the book is the prophecy of Gene Key 55. This arcane chapter describes the time that we are living through as the time of the Great Change." Can you tell us more about this time of great change that we're going through?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I wrote the book, and I was writing it randomly. Each chapter, each key, there are 64 keys that relate to a little bit to the hexagrams of the I Ching, but they're not based on the hexagrams of the I Ching, but they are those archetypes, and they also relate to our genetic code. So the 64 codons that make us up, we're made up of 64, and 64 is a number you see throughout the universe in many natural systems as well. So it's a universal code. And so as I was writing the chapters, I was writing them, sort of choosing them spontaneously, and then I would contemplate it and then go into that archetype and that key. And each key has a shadow component, which describes a victim consciousness pattern, and then it has a gift, which is a higher frequency manifestation of the same archetype, and then it has what's called a siddhi, and the siddhi is a Sanskrit word that means a divine manifestation, or almost like a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that is lying inherent inside us in our DNA, and so we have to begin with these shadows, this shadow consciousness, and really get to understand our shadows and our trauma and what makes us tick, and our wounding, and the slice of our karma that we're here to transform in this lifetime. And then as I was writing that Gene Key 55, it had a completely different energy from anything I'd done so far, and this huge prophecy came out through it. And as I was writing it, it was much longer than any of the other chapters. As I was writing it, I was thinking, wow, this is really extraordinary. And I felt a bit uncomfortable as well, because I'm not sure I wanted to be a prophet or kind of speak these things, but I now find that I am speaking them much more often, because they're more relatable, because the world has moved into this kind of gear, or what some people call the meta crisis now, through all our systems that are kind of in a way in transformation, and the planet itself is in a major transformation, and perhaps even a breakdown in some respects. And so Gene Key 55 speaks to this time. It speaks to a time of massive change that comes around very rarely in different systems and cycles, but it's the time for us now, just moving into it, and a time of, when I talk about like the future human, and in that key, and anyone can, you can read that key in the book. I think it's even on my website somewhere. There's a search. My website, genekeys.com, has all kinds of wormholes. So if you dig into that site, you will find, at the front, it looks kind of all quite innocent, but actually when you get down, there's just so many layers to it, and you can search for things. But if you put in 55 in the search, you'll probably come across the Gene Key 55 and me reading it, and it's free in there.
I noticed those wormholes when I was going through.
Yeah,
Yeah, so many different directions.
A lot of people have fun, and some people get lost down them, but that's natural. But so, yeah, it's an extraordinary transmission, the 55, because it concerns this future human. I call it Homo Sanctus, the sacred human, and it's this dormant human that is kind of coming into the world slowly, is slowly awakening. like a veil after a veil is being pulled back to reveal this incredible being that is waiting inside us. And in order for that to happen, it seems that part of the mythology is that there has to be a kind of breakdown of the old in order for the new to emerge. So this phoenix has to emerge radiant out of the ashes and the crumbling edifices of the old ways. And so that's the kind of energy of Gene Key 55, and it's the key of freedom. And so it teaches us from inside us about what freedom truly is, and it's here to tear open the planes and the layers and it's to drive us actually inward. That's where true freedom is found. It's found on the inside. Freedom on the outside is an echo of real freedom, which is found on the within. So this is an inner turning for humanity, and often, in order for us to really wake up, we need sometimes shocks to kind of make us wake up, and that's what Gene Key 55 speaks to. It speaks to this time where the biggest shock of all could be the breaking down of the planetary systems and the biosphere, and therefore, all kinds of huge humanitarian problems and difficulties that we're facing, that we will be facing in the decades ahead. And so Gene Key 55 is very much, it puts a very positive spin on this time. Actually, it's realistic. In other words, it embraces all the science that's around that we can see, but at the same time, it kind of has this very core teaching that on the other side of this great change lies this incredible being that will awaken through this period, and this period may last decades and decades, and even hundreds of years, because things take time, in our material phenomenal world. But it's a very exciting time, and this book comes to prepare us. Gene Keys and the teachings of the Gene Keys come to prepare us for this time, and to help us embody the future human in our everyday lives. So that's sort of an introduction to it, anyway.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And I want to I know there are a lot of people here who already are very familiar with this work, but for those that are maybe new, can you just give us a bit of an understanding of the origin story of Gene Keys and kind of the foundations of the system, just so we can enter more deeply into the conversation? And I know that we have some visuals that Jacob can bring up when we're ready to.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like many of us, when I was young, I had this kind of interest in the occult and spirituality and these things. And I spent most of my early life exploring all these things. And then I had this experience in my late 20s where I just woke up in my bed one morning from sleep, and I woke up into an awakened state. And an illuminated state, and I, there was no sort of trigger for that. I hadn't taken anything. I wasn't doing anything specific. I just woke up from sleep into a different reality, and it stayed with me for 3 days and 3 nights. And in those 3 days and 3 nights, in that illuminated state, I kind of learned about the origins of the universe, and I learned about what I was or who I was, and as a soul, as an incarnating being, as a limitless being of light, of everythingness, and all the different layers in between. And I kind of understood lots of things, and I remembered lots of things in my body, actually, through my body, through my cells. I remembered lots of things. And I went on a journey throughout Britain while I was, in those 3 days as well, a spontaneous journey that I was just moving around and kind of having experiences whilst I was in this state, and I didn't sleep at all. And then I returned, that state just left me, and I was in Wales actually on the last day, and on an island, and this state just left me, and I became me again. You know, I was really disappointed, I can tell you. And then I struggled after that for many years with what had happened. I didn't know how to frame it. I didn't really have any tools. I had a smattering of knowledge from different traditions, and I traveled and I'd studied with a few teachers, and I particularly loved Taoism, and gone to the East to meet teachers and stuff. But it only sort of came to me after I met my wife, actually, and I met my wife like 7 years after that experience or so, and then in her presence, I think things started to coalesce for me, and I started and I met a system called human design, which was very informative for me, and one of the pillars upon which the Gene Key stands. And I always like to honor it. And I studied with its teacher, Ra Uruhu, an unusual man, who I learned from. And out of that was born the Gene Keys. And I wrote the book, which was a deep contemplation of these different codes and these archetypes. And then I had the bones of a system, and I didn't really know how to use it. And it now operates through an astrological profile, which I was inspired from human design as well, but I didn't know astrology. I still don't really know much about astrology, but the calculations are really powerful. So when you put in your data, your date, time, and place of birth, what you're essentially doing is looking to see where you landed in the space-time continuum in the holographic matrix that is our reality. And because if you're using a system that's based on the number 64 and it's all its coding, 64 is broken up into lots of sixes, you're looking at a universal code, a wheel that's universal. And so it's a very much holographic knowledge, Gene Keys. So where the sun was when you were born in that holographic wheel corresponds to a key, a gene key, so it's showing us, as above, so below, movements of like the choreography, the sacred geometry of the movements of the spheres, and how they correspond to our vehicle here, and our genes and our DNA and the archetypes imprinted in us. And so therefore we have this series of keys that can be unlocked through that profile, which we just shared. And anyone can get their profile from my website, genekeys.com. You can get a free profile and you can look at that. And it's a whole journey. When you begin to look at that profile, you realize, this is not going to give me a quick answer. It's going to give me like a journey that might take me months and even years as you start to decipher it and unravel it. And it requires that kind of humility and patience, as all wisdom does, because the wisdom's inside us, right? And so the system is just a set of tools to reflect archetypes that live inside us. So when you understand like what your archetypes are, which keys relate to different aspects of your life, which keys relate to wounding patterns from your childhood, which keys relate to, gifts of speech that you have potentially impact gifts in your relationships, and then also like patterns that undermine you in relationships. You get to see pretty much everything. Health patterns, it's all in there. Your spiritual, what your highest spiritual awakened state looks like. I mean, I don't know another profile that shows you that. Shows you what you look like fully awakened. It shows you all those archetypes of and these are called the siddhis, and that gives you a kind of map, an inner map that corresponds to something really profound. And obviously the map's made up of words, and I'm a poet, and I'm not a scientist, but I know science, but I write in a poetic way, and I try and share the Gene Keys in a mythic way, because I feel that has more resonance for more human beings. So when you look at the book that we talked about earlier and you're kind of exploring it, you get to see a lot of mythic strands woven together that correspond to you. And so understanding your profile is this beautiful journey and into the keys themselves. And each key is as I said, it's like a holographic portal, a wormhole, an encyclopedia in a way of our whole multiverse that's hidden inside each key. So it opens up and you go down this wormhole and it corresponds to so many different things. Each key corresponds to, a different deity. I haven't even written those, but they do. You can feel it in them. You can feel how we have intuited these things through our creation myths in different cultures. So it's a very human, because it's rooted in this genetic pattern, it in a way transcends different lineages, because it's the root of all lineages, which is what DNA is, because we all have the same DNA, regardless of our culture and our upbringing and our background, or even when we were born, even which century we were, or which millennia we were born in. We have the same imprint. Humans have always had the same imprint, but the imprint itself can be, I was going to say manipulated, but that's not the right word at all. It can be awakened, and it has dormant potential hiding inside it. It has horror stories hiding inside it. We know these because we see them played out, our trauma patterns in the world, but it also has deeply enlightened stories hidden inside it. And that's what the Gene Keys are here to awaken inside us. So each person that goes on the Gene Keys journey, that's the journey they're going on, the journey through the underworld, unpicking some of the difficulties and the challenges of your karma written through these keys, and then transforming them into creative gifts. Because that's the genius part. It's like in our shadows hides our genius. And it's the last place some of us think to look. And it's the last place we want to look. But it's the first place we should look, because that's where the deep transformation lies. And, after a while of being on that journey, your life starts to change, and your feeling inside your body starts to change, because you're unlocking things inside your DNA and you're unlocking more light. So you're unlocking hormonal pathways and neurological circuits that open up genius inside you. And genius isn't just like being intelligent, brainy, a genius can be, it's a deep form of love. It's a deep form of acceptance of being here. So, and it's different for each person, what that genius looks like. So, yeah, that feels like a long story I just told.
Oh, it's great. No, that's excellent. And maybe we can use a specific example, and I'll use mine, because I went on to your website, genekeys.com, and I put in my birth time, place, and everything. And I got my hologenetic profile. And then, so maybe Jacob can bring up that image he had again, and you can just tell us how it works. So up at the top, that's the life purpose gene key, right?
Life's work, we call it. Yeah. And so there's as I said, there's a journey here. There are layers here. And, what you're looking at here is, maybe a year's worth of journeying at the minimum, because each one of these keys is a kind of wormhole, as I said, and it opens up into something that you need to see it at work in your life. It's not just a piece of paper. You need to feel it at work in your life. So your life's work is the top one, and then the bottom one, I'll do those two because they're nice. Otherwise I could go deep into this whole matrix.
Right.
And the bottom one is the core purpose. That's where we ground. So there's work, what we're here to do, and at the bottom is the purpose, who we're here to be. So our being never changes. Our doing can change, but the being is underneath the doing. So our real purpose, anyone's purpose, actually, is to attain a sense of being. And depends what the key is. That key, 42 at the bottom there, is about celebration. So this is a person whose core sense of being at the highest level is someone to celebrate being alive. That is their whole being, and nothing else is as important to this person as that, as just to be someone that is here to celebrate life itself. And they're going to do that in lots of different ways, depending on the little number after the gene key, 42 line 2, and depending on other things in the profile, that's going to manifest in different ways.
So that point 2, is that how they get there? Is that?
That's called the line. So each key is made up of 6 possible lines, and the lines are very colorful. And so when you start to explore these, they're called sequences, as you explore them step by step. And I've created online programs so that people can follow them in sequence with videos and audios and meditations and a journey, and you follow with the book, and you're encouraged to kind of use your life as your practice. And as you do that, you dig into these lines and these gene keys, and the lines are really powerful because they give a sort of nuance to the key. So that line 2 is about freedom, and it's about it's about passion, and it's about dancing. And this is someone that celebrates life in an uninhibited way, right? In a kind of wild way, in an abandoned way. So someone that really needs to kind of be free in their body. And there's different ways of celebrating. If it were a line 1, that would be a very internalized celebration. That would be the celebration through study, through immersion, through deep contemplation, through an inner journey, as opposed to line 2, which would be like, just throw off your clothes, jump in the water, make love in a canoe, all of it. It's all, it's a very different life. It's a tantric life as opposed to a yogic life. And so you get to see the stories that are woven through every key and every line and every, it's beautiful. And you get to unpick it yourself, because no one knows better than you what your story kind of feels like. So I give pointers along the way, and then I invite people to use the art of contemplation. And that's the central kind of technique at the gene keys, at the core of the gene keys, is to use the art of contemplation, which means you let things percolate. You do the work inside yourself. So the answers, because I know that many people here will have questions, and I do a lot of web talks and things, and people have so many questions about the gene keys, and I drive them crazy a lot of the time, because I say, the art of contemplation answers every single possible question under the sun, not just about gene keys, about anything. Is that if you contemplate something for long enough, you will get an answer arise up from inside your body, inside your being, and it will kill the question. It will literally answer the question. It will delete the question. You'll be like, the question was actually the illusion. The answer was like something, an epiphany or an insight or a breakthrough that had to happen inside me. So questions are, there can be questions at the mental level. There can be questions at a deeper emotional level. And there can be really deep, profound, visceral kind of questions that rise up from deep in our soul. And those are the deepest kind of questions. So the art of contemplation, applying that to your gene keys and to your journey, helps you find the wisdom that's inside you, rather than looking for someone on the outside to tell you knowledge. That's knowledge. Knowledge is something that is put into you. Wisdom is something that emerges from inside you. So no one else can get that wisdom except you. It requires an inner turning. It requires an inner journey, an interiority. That's what the gene keys are all for. They look kind of all, they're deliberately quite glitzy and sort of complex looking and interesting, and because it's a trick, right? It catches your imagination. Like, I want to understand this. I want to understand this word. Why have I got the word corruption? I'm not corrupt. And then you go on this journey into like, what does that word mean, and what are the nuances in it? And you get to realize, actually, corruption has shown up in lots of different ways in my life. And like, what am I? And I haven't fully learned the lesson of it yet. And so the words themselves are kind of these portals, but then the answers are kind of They come from inside us, from very deep within our body. And that's when the journey becomes much easier, because you can then, once you've learned that art of contemplation, you can apply it to anything in your life. You can apply it to absolutely anything, your relationships, your health, a problem in your business, anything can be answered, and not just answered, but enacted. So I see that I've written a little book on the art of contemplation as well. It's a very short book, just the technique and how simple it is and how easy it is, and how much humans need to learn that lesson, because we're so knowledge centric. We look through our eyes and we're looking for knowledge all the time, and science is delivering knowledge from the outside. And science is wonderful, but it's very different from wisdom. Wisdom, it does away with the questions. So
Yes.
Permanently.
Yeah. Maybe we can apply the principles of the art of contemplation, which you outline as allow, accept, and embrace. For instance, my life's work number was 22, which interestingly I read is you see a strong connection with 55, which we were talking about before. And the shadow is dishonor, the gift is graciousness, the siddhi is grace. So if I were to apply contemplation, where do I start with this?
Well, you'd start with the shadow. So you would start to think about, you might just start by thinking about it. You'd read the book, you'd listen to the audio, you might do one of the meditations or something. And then you start to think about your life, and through the lens of that word dishonor, and you go, well, where do I dishonor myself and others? And as you start to consider it, and you might also hold the other end of the frequency at the same time, which is grace, and grace is something very mysterious and beautiful and kind of miraculous. And so in a way, you're contemplating dishonor and grace and the journey. How does one come out of the other? And because in a way, the shadow is a seed. And if we put attention on that seed and we have the courage to really look at it, then that seed might open up and become a flower. And then that flower might create a fruit. And that's like the shadow, and then the gift, and then the siddhi. And so that one especially has a lot to do with our relationships. It has a lot to do with, if you read that key, it's a very long, mysterious key as well. It is an anomaly, 22. It's sort of, I like that, it's one of the patterns, 22 and 55, they're almost upside downs of each other.
Right.
And 20, being grace, it has, it has all the keys to human suffering hidden inside it, of why we suffer. And so having that key as your life's work, it puts you very much in the camp of like needing to understand trauma, human trauma and human suffering. And it's difficult to it was like, if you have a key like that, you're going to meet those things in your life. It's just, you're just going to meet them. We all do in different ways, but you might even create your life's work out of it, out of like something to do with that. And you get to see then where do the places that I've dishonored myself, even like telling a lie to someone, or telling a lie to myself, or there's so many ways, small ways and big ways, we dishonor ourselves. We don't listen. We make compromises, where we, and then we end up hurting ourselves, and then we dishonor others as well. And so it's about learning what is dishonor and how does it operate. And then the gift is graciousness, which is how you handle dishonor. And so that is a beautiful story hidden in that key. It's like, if you can, out of your dishonor, awaken graciousness, and if you can then meet the dishonor in others with graciousness, then you will unlock the miracle of grace. And grace is like something, is when something extraordinary happens. So you hear all these stories all the time of someone who's had a deep trauma or difficulty, or is, and then forgives the person that did it. And then there's this, and they treat it with grace, with graciousness. So it's about returning non-love with love. It's that Christ-like journey. And then when you're able to do that, truly able to do that inside your heart, then grace is the byproduct. Something happens. That other person who was dishonoring maybe has a breakthrough. Maybe they're the one that then has an epiphany because they've been forgiven and they felt that level of forgiveness. So there's a whole mythic storyline. There are multiple mythic storylines in each key, and you have to unravel what's mine. What happened in my childhood? What did my dad do to me, or my mum, or what happened? Or and then you start to thread together, and then when I was 13 this happened, and then that happened, and then this relationship was, where's the suffering in your life? And then you get to see where's the dishonor happening, and then you learn to treat it with graciousness, particularly through your relationships. And the more you can learn that skill, that gift, then the more you unlock that kind of an extraordinary numinous power of grace that creates literally miracles in the field around you. Because that's when you're activating that siddhi, that highest aspect that is much more of that's the future human. Future human is a collective being. It's a networked consciousness that interpenetrates all beings, all of us. And so when you open up those channels of grace through those higher centers, then correspondences occur in the universe around you, and little miracles start to pop open because you've shifted it inside you. And then it starts to manifest in the field around you. And that's like, we call that a miracle, but actually it's a byproduct of you doing the inner work. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
Yeah.
that might be a way in.
Yes, thank you. And just to maybe bring it into sort of broad terms for others, whatever they're contemplating. So what I'm understanding is that by living with this first word, the shadow word, and going deeply into how that's playing out within me and in my relationships in my life, and then starting to apply the gift and seeing the ways that gift, I don't know if the word is frees me from that shadow. Is that right? Or it just kind of elevates me beyond that shadow. It's not, so the shadow's not running things.
Yeah, the gift kind of takes the raw energy of the shadow and makes it creative. It creates something beautiful out of it. So it doesn't it's not that you need to be freed from it. It's like it's raw material. So it actually vivifies you. It actually makes you more alive. So all the gifts are gifts of creativity, and that's what humans are here to do. We're here to create. Whether you create a business, or whether you create a garden, or whether you create, anything. It's like we're here to create things. You might, and you might create a family. You might create, it's the essence of creativity, and graciousness is a form of creativity, like in relationships. That meets everything. Graciousness is not just being nice and sweet. It's actually very dynamic. It adapts quickly and masterfully to difficult situations and circumstances. That's why the life's work wants to deal with difficult circumstances, because the graciousness kind of gets more juice out of those situations. And that's why you will draw them in, so that you can master how to tackle arguments, how to, make really good apologies. I love that. So that's a thing I've taught in videos. Like, here's how to do a really good apology. Here, I've heard some really bad apologies in my life. Like people that just, it's got the art of apology is like a real thing.
Yes, I agree. I've had to learn that lesson for sure.
And so like things like that, that's one of the sort of agents of graciousness. That's one of the techniques of graciousness. And so there's a whole panoply of skills and diplomatic capacities and gifts and talents that are embedded in that word graciousness. And then slowly, as that becomes a part of who you are, it becomes a custom. So in other words, then when something difficult happens, you immediately pivot. Instead of reacting like through your shadow, you immediately pivot through the gift, and you meet it, like you do an aikido with it, and you meet it with that graciousness, and you feel the joy of it actually, and then there's a transformation, and then grace is the byproduct. And the grace may or may not happen in that moment. That's not something in our control, but it's always there as a potential.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. I'm just looking at our time, and we've got about 15 minutes left, and there's lots of great questions and comments coming in from the live audience. So if it's okay with you, we can tend to some of those.
Sure.
Okay, great. I'm just going to quickly look here. Okay, here's a question from Laura. Question for Richard. If all the gene keys link to a deity, which ones are 55 and 59?
I already put my foot in it on that one, didn't I?
Yeah.
I don't know, to be honest.
Okay.
If I contemplated it, I would probably come up with an answer. But I haven't done that with the keys. I just sense them at times. But you can look into those words and if you go deep in those keys and you read them and you listen to them, you'll begin to feel, what that stream kind of relates to. So we've been talking about 55, and you get the feeling that it's a pivotal key and it's about huge breakthroughs. So that's like a kind of explosive energy potentially. And deep, also 55 is very deeply romantic. It's a romance in the highest sense of the word. And so the deity might be one of those romantic deities, or one of those gods or goddesses of like love, or I don't know. And 59 has to do with deep relationships, and it's a beautiful key, transparency. So you can each key also, you could relate it to an animal or a bird or a mineral or everything has a web of correspondences. Like, so 59, for example, is the heron. If you think of a heron, it relates like the bird, the heron. It stands on stock still on the side of the water, gazing into the water, completely still. This is transparency, and so it represents, in a way, symbolically, that capacity, that transparent capacity. And then when it sees the fish, and it just goes, boom, and that's the incredible clarity that can come through that key. It has that kind of capacity. So sometimes you'll find mythic kind of correspondences. And again, in Gene Keys, I've done some of these correspondences. I haven't done the deities, but I have done the birds and the animals, and you can find them on my website. It's got a system called the Dream Arc, which is also on my website.
Okay, great. Thanks for that question, Laura.
Yeah, good question.
There's one here from Jennifer who says, Richard, what role do so-called quote unquote dark emotions play in the frequencies of shadow, gift, and siddhi? Is it that the frequency of those emotions increase, or are they only experienced in the shadow?
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I can kind of riff off it. It's a world of frequencies, so the shadow is a band of frequencies, of behavioral frequencies. And so emotions are caught up in that level. Mental thought patterns are caught up in that level. They're victim patterns. So there's an emotional victim pattern that plays out at the shadow level, and there's a mental victim pattern. So the way you think about things can also be keeping you in a victim loop. And gene keys often work in pairs, so they're called programming partners, and they create these biofeedback loops. And so one key helps the other keep a pattern engaged, but at the same time you can awaken the gift, and the gift also one key helps another key become free inside you. So you can your contemplation helps to unlock these energies. And so it's about, that's what we were talking about earlier, allow, accept, embrace. When you're working with the shadow frequencies, you begin with allowing. So you just allow them. You know, so you're literally just beginning to watch them, and they're passing through your system or someone else's system or the room or in a connection, in a relationship, and you just have to allow them, and you don't have to like them in any way. You can, you know, you can be, you know, allowing is just allowing. And then over time, as you continue to allow them, you stop resisting them, and then you begin to accept. And acceptance is also a process. It's a process that's quite uncomfortable, actually, because accepting a negative emotion or a shadow pattern that we've got running requires that we see it, that we become aware of it. And as we become more and more aware of it on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, because it keeps emerging for us, that acceptance grows deeper and deeper and deeper. And it finally turns into the embrace, allow, accept, embrace. Embrace is when we no longer want it to go away. You know, we've actually fully embraced it, and there's no part of us that is in resistance to it. And then it's transformed into the gift, and the gift is just there. The gift is something creative is happening or has happened, and you're no longer in the thrall of that old pattern. So I don't know if that helps to explain the question, but maybe it gets you a bit of the way in.
I think from my sense of it, you're definitely touching on it. She was wondering about if the frequency of the shadow emotion changes as it moves through from gift to siddhi. That's how I read it too. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. There's one here from Rollo who's curious about your experience. Do you continue to experience connection to higher light frequencies? And is that experience always similar?
It's like, for me, I had the big experience, and then I had a couple of big experiences. I had another one in 2004, and then I had some ripples and some tremors over the years where, you know, the door opens. I mean, in the early one, the door opened fully, and the hinges were gone. There was no door, and then it closed, but it kind of stayed ajar for me in a way. So I'm very fortunate in that I have this door that's a little bit ajar to the higher frequencies, so I can, when I go quiet and in my contemplation practice, I immediately tune into those higher frequencies, and I can do that anytime. But I've built that as a custom inside myself, and anyone can do that. Actually, you have to build the route, you know, to those higher frequencies for really calming your system, and dropping into a deep, quiet space inside you. I use the art of contemplation, which is different from sort of formal meditation. In a way, my eyes are open. I am sitting. I also run. I'm a runner. I love running, and I contemplate when I'm running. I enter into a really beautiful state when I'm running, and other times as well. You can get, the more you expand into that state when you're doing it in a sitting practice, the more you can bring it into other areas. So I, in the mornings, wake up early and I look at the sky, and I have a little cup of tea with me. I have my little Chinese tea, which I love. And I make a little tea, and it's very aesthetic and pleasing because it gives me a little ritual. And then the steam is coming off, and the dawn light is coming, or it's dark, and I have a lantern, and I'm sitting there in the dark and the cold, wrapped up warm, because I live in the UK and it's cold here in the mornings usually. And then I start to gaze at the sky and the light and the morning light, and then immediately in that space I enter into, I don't know how to call it, but I enter into the field. My thoughts start to thin out, you know, and I become like the sky, and I'm just gazing. And then into that silence sometimes drops an insight, like a thought comes in, but it's like a bird that flies across the screen, and because there's so much space around it, when it comes in, it really has like depth to it. And you can really see it, and it's come for a reason. And I look at it and I go, wow, I can follow that. I might follow that, or I might just let it go. It's like, depends on how I'm feeling. But from that point of view, I do it every day, and I have done for years, decades, and it goes deeper and deeper into your life. It's making a pathway into the depths of your being. into the silence at the core of your being. It's a beautiful thing to do. It's I mean, once you've kind of made that pathway, it never goes away. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does. I think what I'm taking from what you're saying is that these experiences we don't get to control when they happen, but we can create the conditions and have that consistent practice where we find a relative stability in peace and expansiveness, whether they're those more graceful experiences or not.
Yeah, and sure, sometimes the clouds open and something really powerful comes in, and that still happens from time to time. But it's like that's the grace. When the grace touches down, it kind of takes over your whole body and your whole being, and those are rarer events for me. I call those epiphanies, and they can happen to any of us at any time. But you're right, absolutely. You can create the conditions for that. I talk about that in my little contemplation book, I call insight, breakthrough, and epiphany. Insight is when the mind opens, and those happen more often. Like if you're studying the gene keys, like if you talk to people who've like studied the gene keys for a while and they've been contemplating them, once you have your first insight or web of insights, you're like, oh, now I understand what he's talking about, because you had an experience of it. And then the deeper layer is the breakthrough, which is an emotional field. It's when something actually shudders through your emotional field, and it may come out as tears, or it may come out as laughter, or it comes out as a kind of physical thing. And then the epiphanies are even rarer and deeper, where the light field gets activated through the cells of your body and your DNA, and you get a kind of a heightened experience of consciousness or transcendent consciousness that kind of washes through you and leaves you different. And so those three are together. So the more of the insights you have, the more you will occasionally have the breakthroughs. And when you occasionally have the breakthroughs, a certain number of those will kind of end up being an epiphany at some point. So they're all kind of, it's a kind of layers of going deeper into the inner world and how the inner world opens and reveals itself to us. It's the way of revelation. Very ancient path revelation.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more quick question from the audience. This is from Poetically Inclined 2, who says, do you recommend looking at your children's gene keys when they are young to help guide them?
People ask this question quite often, and it's a beautiful thing to do, actually. I would look at their siddhis. I would look at their highest, the words of their angelic being, their angelic presence. This is the master who's arrived in your life. And, I would forget the rest of it and just hold those. That's what I've done with my children. I only know their cities. I guess I could figure out some of the, I could look at their shadows and things. I'd know what they were, but I don't think about them. I just hold those highest of archetypes. And I think we need to do that with each other more often, to hold each other in the highest aspects of our being. And I know that for children, they feel that when you hold that for them, and they can go out into the world and they're going to make all kinds of mistakes and they're going to do crazy things later in their life, especially. But if you continue to hold those higher frequencies, they will every now and again come back to you like an oasis. They'll feel like there's one person, or at least one person in the world, who is holding that frequency for me. And they don't even necessarily know why they keep wanting to come back to it. But it's such a treasure to be able to do that for our kids and for each other as well, actually. And of course, for ourselves, because, that's how we parent ourselves. Think of yourself as a Buddha. Think of yourself as a Christ. Think of yourself as the highest aspects of consciousness. So, and there's a fun thing in the Gene Keys profile where you can switch off all the shadows. I wish you could do that in real life, and even all the gifts, and just leave the cities. And then you've got this wow, this is me as the Christ. This is me as the enlightened one. Quite fun.
Well, that's lovely. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, I know there's a new layer that you're working with called the star pearl. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And I think we have an image to show too.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like I guess some people call this a Merkaba. It's a field of light. It's a new aspect of working with your profile. It's been years in development, and it's got some quite cool tech coming behind it that's been developed that allows us to drill into the gene keys in a more subjective way. So there's a deep, very nuanced self-assessment that you do that kind of goes into these different areas of your life in multiple different lenses. And then you're literally asked to score different areas of your life that then get averaged out. And then you see which gene keys relate to those areas. And you get given what's called an action triangle, which is a triangle in this matrix, which will connect any three keys. And there are 20 different triangles, and they all have different names. What it does is it allows you to focus very specifically on the areas of your life where the most work is needed. So it's a bit like mechanic tuning a car. This is a more tuned approach to using the gene keys. And so each person will have a different triangle to work on, and then different gene keys and lines in those spheres. So it's a more focal way of working with the keys, and then you can track as you go on a contemplative journey, and then you can do the assessment again, and then see if your scores have changed. And the scores are kind of arranged through a spectrum. So it's literally a spectrum. It enables you to kind of gauge where you are on the spectrum. And it enables you to also track that over time. And so you can actually see the gene keys having an impact in your life through different areas. And you're not just thinking about it or contemplating, you're actually putting it into action. That's why I call it action triangles. So there's workbooks developed that go with it that kind of are completely personalized to your gene keys. It's a really cool system. We're using the tech kind of really elegantly to enable the gene keys to kind of really focus on shifting stuck areas of our lives and bringing harmony. It's called the harmonics of the future human, the star pearl. And so it's about embodying the harmonics of a future human by kind of bringing areas that are out of sync into a higher frequency, and then everything in your life starts to hum. So when you address, let's say it's your relationships, let's say things are looking good for you, but you've got this kind of place in relationships or this one relationship that's really annoying you and bugging you, that would bring your scores down through the questioning. And then you'd be like, okay, I got to deal with that. How am I going to deal with that? And then you look at the gene key and you look at the shadow that relates to that. It would be the sphere of relating on the top right there. And it would have come up for you because of the questions would bring it forth. And then you would be like, okay, how does that key relate? How does the shadow pattern, how do I disable that shadow pattern? How do I transform that? What's the gift there? And then over time, working with that, it starts to shift in your life. And then your scores change and your harmonic, it shifts. So it's a way of mapping in a much more kind of nuanced and dialed way, according to each individual. It's a way of changing our life to kind of create more harmony around us, so that that inner being, that soul being that I was talking about earlier, can more fully inhabit our body and our life. And that's, and we get to also, I mean, this is being launched in January, February. It's on the front of my website if anyone's interested, and we'll be talking a lot about it in January, and would love to invite anyone who wants to come on do a big social experiment, because we can also map the whole community moving through this process. I'm going to do it over 9 months next year. I figure that to create a new human is going to need at least 9 months. Gestation period, right? And so we're going to do a gestation period from January to October, well, February actually, we begin to like October, November. And we're going to go through it as a big community, and individuals mapping their star pearls, but also a group star pearl. So you can see the whole community shifting its frequency through the because the stats can go into the system if you agree to your scores being shared with the system, which is completely up to you. It's anonymous. Then we can see a whole community shifting to a higher harmonic, which I think was very exciting, because that for me is the future human. The future human is a collective rather than only an individual. It's when the collective starts to awaken its genius, then anything on this planet becomes possible. So I think it's going to be an exciting journey. It's the next phase of the Gene Keys. It's sort of a new era starting 2025.
Wow, it sounds like an exciting experiment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Folks,
and good for newcomers, good for anyone. Yeah.
Folks, we've been speaking with Richard Rudd. His new 15th anniversary edition of Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose, is coming out on December 17th. That's in Canada, at least. Of course, you can get it at Banyan.com. Please support your local independent bookstores. And Richard's website is genekeys.com, where you can, as he said, there's many wormholes, tons of resources there to check out. Richard, on behalf of all of the Banyan community, thank you so much. I know there was a lot of excitement around you coming, and it was really good to connect with you.
Thank you. It was lovely to meet you, and I hope that this was inspiring for people, and you're interested to come and find out a bit more.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.